Marvel vs. Capcom 3 stands tall as one of the greatest crossover games of all time, often hailed as the last truly exceptional entry in the series. With its massive roster of beloved fan favourite characters, it delivers an electrifying experience that continues to captivate and thrill players to this day. But here's a little known fact: despite the already impressive lineup, even more iconic characters were originally planned to join the fray during the game's development. So with that said, join me today to discuss how we know this and spotlight every competitor who nearly made it to the dance. Hello ladies and gentlemen, Big Daddy Top Hat here. This is the incredible lost roster members of Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Yeah! The Marvel vs. Capcom series is the ultimate collision of worlds, blending the iconic heroes and villains of Marvel with the legendary fighters of Capcom into one explosive, adrenaline-fueled brawl. It's a high-octane frenzy of lightning-fast combos, draw-dropping super moves, and epic team battles. Most would agree that these games are a non-stop thrill ride that's both accessible for casual fans and deep enough for hardcore players, which makes it all the more brilliant that we can finally play all the classic arcade games from this series in one single comprehensive collection. Despite this coveted compilation only being available on the market for a few weeks, I can already get you a massive 24% off of this must-have selection, simply by using my affiliate link, or perhaps even more insanely, I can get you a ridiculous 77% off the ultimate version of Marvel vs. Capcom 3, an awesome game and the very subject of this video. Get up to 90% off of thousands of other modern, indie, AAA and retro titles too, simply by clicking my link below. Thanks to all of you who have continued to adore these deals, Instant Gaming have chosen to sponsor this channel for a 7th month in a row. So for that, I'm eternally grateful. Don't you just adore crossovers when they actually work? Speaking of great crossovers, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, along with its ultimate iteration, would be produced by a gentleman known as Ryota Nitsuma at the helm. Due to lots of information that he's shared in the past, Nitsuma serves as a primary source, verifying the intention to include a range of different fighters who would never make the final cut. Making my job a hell of a lot easier, a Reddit user in r/Kappa has previously already compiled a lot of this info, providing us with links to look at as to where each character that was worked on was mentioned online. It appears that the info that Nitsuma has chosen to put out there has been mostly through a series of tweets, as well as through apparently speaking at San Diego's Comic-Con back in 2010. So without further ado, let's dig in. Following the links I just mentioned, one leads to an Events Hub post from Valentine's Day 2017, with a headline claiming that over 150 female characters were considered for addition in Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, but none of them made the cut. They would report that they would learn that via Twitter, Nitsuma would begin dumping info on cancelled characters. Nitsuma claims that the game's character count got reduced in the middle of developing Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, so there were many characters that got forcibly cut, and no matter how hard they tried, they just couldn't come to any agreements regarding female characters, so ended up having no new girls on the roster at all with that variation. While of course disappointing news to hear, at least he would tell us about some of the characters they intended to put in the game, who were sadly left on the cutting room floor. Amongst those we had Gil, the false prophet and final boss of Street Fighter 3, who is the leader of the mysterious dangerous group known as the Secret Society. As for why he got dropped, Nitsuma states he remained in the run-in to the very end, but they ended up replacing him with Nemesis. Their reasons was that he felt like an unnatural fit with Marvel vs. Capcom 3's game speed, and that they felt that they probably had too many Street Fighter characters already. Although personally, considering how Street Fighter Alpha heavy the Capcom crossover series has always been, I think it would have been very cool to see him in the game instead. Next, he mentions the character Fao Lu, a character from the Breath of Fire series, and one of the playable characters in Breath of Fire 4. According to Nitsuma, this character was very domestically popular in Japan, so they wanted him in the game. He adds that there was a lot of cool stuff to use for him, like his energy sword, his monster servants, shape changing and dragon form, but due to the level of work we had to put into him, we thought nobody abroad would recognise him, so we ended up dropping him. Other intended cut characters include Sun Sun, the female descendant of the original Capcom Sun Sun character, based on the Monkey King from the beloved Sun Wukong Tao. She previously featured in Marvel vs. Capcom 2. In addition to her, Mai Ling was also considered, a martial artist from Capcom's largely overlooked Red Earth fighting game. Then we have Kat, a feline-like being who is yet another character from the Breath of Fire series. All three of these females that were considered would have, according to Nitsuma, have been mechanically similar in that they all would have been staff users. Sadly though, they ended up losing priority. Arietta from Cyberbots was also someone they thought about adding to the game. However, after some consideration due to her racy appearance, they decided that it would probably be best to leave her out, due to her potentially giving them trouble with the game's age rating. This same logic would be applied to the Middle Eastern character known as Rouge, due to her incredibly alluring transformation. As mentioned, while Mai Ling from Red Earth was thought about, Tessa from the same game was also amongst the Marvel vs. Capcom cut characters. Unfortunately though, Nitsuma doesn't provide any context as to why she was cut, but he does mention that he really pushed for her as he wanted to have her rival the impact palm loops of Doctor Strange in the game. More Darkstalkers representation was also at one point planned for the game, with the team creating a grown-up version of the character Anita. Nitsuma states that he thinks the staff went too far with this idea though, as there was no design like the one they had come up with, even in Darkstalkers. He also adds that Ingrid from Capcom Fighting Evolution was also proposed, with all him having to say about this is, "You again." I have to admit I share his disdain for this ridiculous character. In the same series of tweets, he would also reveal that one character who actually remained until their very last cuts was Nina, whom he adds was based on her Breath of Fire 1 design. He adds that he personally prefers her Breath of Fire 3 design though, and they were even thinking about having a super where she brought out all of the other Ninas, kind of like Mega Man's Final Smash in Super Smash Bros. On the Wii U. In another series of tweets from the gentleman, we would have the opportunity to learn about some of the cut Marvel characters too, as well as a dash of info regarding why they opted to put certain fighters in the game over others. He brings up that MODOK was chosen due to his visual impact, and the fact that he provided a lot of freedom in fighting styles, and Phoenix made it into the game due to her immense popularity and the importance of the Dark Phoenix angle. As for those that didn't make it, Black Widow would be amongst the victims. This member of the Avengers would be dropped from plans for the game due to them feeling she'd be too similar to their other gun/weapon based fighters they included. This same logic was applied to the Hood, the supervillain whom blends street level crime with supernatural elements. Miss Marvel at one point was also a character they considered, however they decided the character was dull and didn't really stand out much in comparison to more impressive characters such as She-Hulk and Storm. Bad Boy and everyone's favourite Fatty the Kingpin was also talked about, but unfortunately this roly-poly pulverizer would be left out due to them deciding that MODOK would feature as a more fun addition. The complex anti-hero and villain known as Mystique was another fighter they thought about, but ultimately the Blue Beauty would not see an inclusion due to them coming to the conclusion that a character who can change their appearance as their main gimmick would have been difficult to implement and balance properly within the fighting game they intended. Loki, whose speciality is deceiving his opponents through magical illusions, was also a Marvel character they wanted in the game. But once again, Nitsuma admits that they never quite worked out how they could implement him. Nitsuma jokes that the Vision was also considered, but his abilities were just simply too powerful for the game. A third Event Hub's article provides us with more translated versions of this man's tweets, providing us with more info on why certain Marvel characters were and weren't added to the game. In terms of inclusions, he adds Nova was put in the game due to the fact that Marvel were pushing very hard for them to include him, and that Ghost Rider was put in the game due to his popularity and the fact that they liked the idea of using his bike in one of his supers. Rocket Raccoon would also make it in, even though Nitsuma reportedly wanted to include Squirrel Girl instead, but adds that there turned out to be way more Raccoon fans than Squirrel fans at their office, so they went with him. Another fighter that Marvel pushed really hard was for Doctor Strange, a character they too liked the idea of including, due to there being a lot of moveset potential with magic as a base. As for who was proposed, whom would get dropped, Vampire Hunter Blade was considered, but they decided that he was too similar to Dante, so opted to leave him out. In addition to this, they also had the idea to play Spider-Woman in the game, and ultimately thought they were a bit too similar to Trish. Psylocke was another character they at one point wanted to include, due to her being both recognisable and loving her design. They also loved the idea of having her fight Strider, but she ended up not making the final cut either. Spiral, whom was in Marvel vs. Capcom 2, was someone else they wanted in the game, but the 6 arms with swords and various magic attacks led to this actual quote from the development room: "This is way too much of a hassle, please, let's not." Nitsuma adds that Cloak and Dagger were also intended, as they're visually interesting and sure leave an impact, and felt they were even more cool because they kind of feel like a stand user and a stand from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. But the backside of that is that with such an action-packed game, including assists, it have gotten too hectic with them. The decision was also made that the game wouldn't be able to support 2 characters in one. Multiple Man was also pitched, but the idea was left out for the same reason. Years prior to all these tweets, an old article from 2010 can also be located on Event Hubs. It states that Ryan CE transcribed a Q&A session that was held with the Marvel vs. Capcom 3 developers that contained some interesting notes, including info on characters whom were and were not included in the game. The short but simple notes tell us that the Thing was considered at one point, but they felt he would be too similar to the Hulk. In addition to this, Human Torch was a completed character, but he ate up too much RAM and had to be taken out of the game due to limitations. This would lead to Marvel suggesting Super Skrull as a Human Torch replacement, who would indeed make the cut as a powerful rushdown character. To further balance the roster, Nitsuma wanted to include a young Marvel female, and this is why ultimately X-23 was decided on. It also notes that Nitsuma intentionally held off of Spider-Man's announcement until the Tokyo Game Show because the character is so popular in Japan. Elsewhere, during the game's development, we can learn that Marvel was reluctant to grant permission to include Shuma Gorath, but Capcom convinced them that he is popular and an important part of the Marvel vs. Capcom crossover series history, so unfortunately decided to change their stance. Speaking of Shuma Gorath, this was the first Marvel character that Capcom proposed to Marvel. Building on the info surrounding lost characters from the game, there is also that Reddit post I mentioned earlier, written by an individual whom claims to have attended a Marvel vs. Capcom 3 San Diego Comic-Con panel and seen Nitsuma speak live in 2010. The post states that Nitsuma mentioned that one of his favourite characters to create was Emma Frost for Marvel, but not long into developing her, Marvel had another idea. I assume this was part of their push for Phoenix, which S-Kill said Marvel came up with the entire Phoenix Dark Phoenix gameplay concept, later confirmed by the mind-melting character he was referring to pre-release. It goes on to add that it was also at this panel that Nitsuma mentioned that each stage was tied to a character, which ties into another point. Not long after the game was announced, a list of characters was taken out of the source of the page of the official website. When Tatsunoko v Capcom was officially announced, the same day a roster was pulled from the US website, which ended up being the final roster down to the T. This list included characters like Magneto, Storm, Arthur, Hagar, and Tron Bonne, well before their release. Those are easy enough to expect, but it also had Taskmaster, X-23, Grisinko, Trish, and the absence of any version of Mega Man, much harder characters to predict. It also had characters we know were worked on but cut, such as Juggernaut, Frank West, Mr. Fantastic, alt costumes of Frank West, Iron Man being Chuck Green, War Machine, Emma Frost before the aforementioned Comic-Con panel, and the only one unaccounted for was Elektra. Given the accuracy of unrevealed characters, characters known to have been worked on before being dropped, and the way it was leaked previously being corrected, coupled with the comment that every stage was tied to a character, and the hand hideout stage being the sole exception, it's very likely that was at one point the final roster in the start of development, and that Elektra was in Marvel's roster. The same Reddit poster, whom claims to have watched the whole Marvel vs. Capcom 3 pre-release unfold with anticipation, also mentions that Frank Thierry said on Twitter that if they included all the planned characters on each side they wanted, instead of 6 in each side of Ultimate Marvel vs. Capcom 3, Luke Cage would have been included on the Marvel side. As for Cyclops, it states that Marvel said no to including him, but Nitsuma just said yes, then mimed a visor across his eyes and drew an X over his chest with his fingers. They also add that Juggernaut was worked on, but Marvel eventually said they could use Scent or Juggernaut after S-Kill basically pestered Marvel every day for about a year about Scent. S-Kill pushed for Scent due to the competitive legacy. Reportedly, according to the other Reddit post I mentioned at the start of the video compiling info on the game, it adds that the Silver Surfer was also planned, but since his bald couldn't be incorporated into the engine, he thought without it, but he looked too similar to Iceman. It also states that Dr. Octopus was made for the game, and even had a theme, but there were too many glitches with his tentacle attacks, and that John Tolbane from Darkstalkers was also planned, but cut before the final product. According to the post, Soki from Onimusha was also supposed to be included, but the team made him an early phase character, but felt he was too weak and too slow and couldn't balance him in time. On top of all of this, other characters are listed too who are believed to have been cut from the game as well. But the further and further we go down this rabbit hole, the less concrete information slowly becomes. No matter what way we look at this situation, it's always interesting to think about what could have been and hear development tales like this regarding what is and isn't in a game and why. What's really cool though is that in spite of there being so many characters getting cut, there is a passionate group of fans who are creating a version of the game called Marvel vs. Capcom 3 Community Edition. This means that the fan modding community have added over 50 characters to the Marvel vs. Capcom 3 roster. Many of the fighters that were planned yet left out, that were conceptualized all those years prior, have finally been included in the game. So if you want to learn more about this epic fan offering, watch my video on the topic immediately preceding this one. Don't forget I can also get you a massive discount on both the brand new Marvel vs. Capcom Arcade Fighting Collection, as well as the official Ultimate version of Marvel vs. Capcom 3. Get huge deals on these and thousands of other titles by using my affiliate link down below. Happy shopping and cheerio.